The first thing you notice is the way the light changes. One moment you're sitting on your couch, phone in hand, the TV on low because it's past 11 and the kids are asleep. Next, your living room is bleeding blue and red through the blinds. Strobing. Silent except for the low rumble of an idling engine you hadn't registered until now. Then the knock comes. Not a friendly neighbor tap. This is a hard, closed-fist percussion that travels through the front door and into your chest. Knock, knock, knock. Police department, open the door. You freeze. Every instinct says pretend you don't hear. But the shadows move outside your window. 2, maybe 3 silhouettes. One of them has a hand resting near a hip. They're not leaving. Another knock, louder this time. We just want to talk. Open up. Your heart is hammering against your ribs, and you haven't even done anything wrong. That's the part nobody warns you about. The way your body betrays you even when your conscience is clean. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with for a second, and I genuinely want you to think about your answer. Has law enforcement ever shown up at your home unexpectedly, late at night, early morning, middle of the day, and started asking you questions at your own front door, pressured you to let them inside, made you feel like saying no would only make things worse? Drop your experience in the comments, seriously, because later in this article, I'm going to break down the specific phrases, the psychological traps, and the split-second mistakes that determine whether that knock on your door ends in 30 seconds of awkward conversation or a full-blown search of your private living space. And I promise you, most of what you think you know about your rights when police come to your home is dangerously wrong. Let me rewind and tell you about something most people have never even heard of. Something that makes that knock on your door far more likely than you ever imagined. It's called a cell site simulator. You might know it as a StingRay, a Hailstorm, or any of a dozen other brand names that sound like military hardware, because that's exactly what they are. And the simple, terrifying truth is this. Police across the United States have been using these devices to track your every movement without a warrant, without your knowledge, and often without any meaningful oversight. They turn your own pocket computer, the phone you sleep with 3 feet from your head, into a tracking beacon that tells law enforcement precisely when you're home, when you leave, how long you stay, and even which room of your house you're standing in when they decide to knock. I want you to really feel what that means, because we're not talking about science fiction. We're not talking about some abstract surveillance program that only targets criminals. Cell simulators are deployed by local police departments, sheriff's offices, federal task forces, and even campus security in some cases. They mimic a legitimate cell phone tower. Your phone doesn't know the difference. It sees a strong signal and connects automatically, handing over your unique identifier, your device's equivalent of a fingerprint. And just like that, law enforcement knows you're inside your bedroom at 11:47 p.m. They know your phone moved from the kitchen to the bathroom at 2:30 a.m. They know when you walk out to take the trash to the curb. They know when you're not home at all. And they're building a timeline of your life without ever setting foot on your property. Let me tell you about a real case that should make your stomach turn. In 2019, federal agents used a cell simulator to track a man suspected of a nonviolent crime. They parked outside his apartment building, activated the device, and watched his phone's movements in real time. They didn't have a warrant based on probable cause. They had something far weaker, a court order under a legal provision called the pen register statute, which the government has long argued doesn't require the same constitutional protection as a full search warrant. The device told them he was home. They knocked, he opened the door, and within minutes, agents were inside his living room, asking questions, looking around, noting everything they could see from the threshold. He never knew that the device outside had already mapped his patterns for 3 full weeks before they ever made themselves known. Here's what the police won't tell you. And I mean this with full respect for the difficult job officers do every day. They won't explain that the knock on your door is often the result of surveillance you cannot see, cannot consent to, and cannot opt out of unless you leave your phone behind entirely, which almost nobody in modern America is willing to do. The officer standing on your porch at midnight isn't thinking about the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches. They're thinking about the tip, the suspect description, the pattern of data that says someone matching your general characteristics might be connected to something. But here's the psychological trap that destroys so many innocent people. You assume that because you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. So you open the door. You smile. You try to be helpful. And that helpfulness is exactly what officers are trained to exploit. I've watched body camera footage that will never be released to the public, but I've seen enough to know the pattern by heart. An officer knocks, the resident opens the door, usually holding it partially closed with one hand, body angled slightly backward, already uncomfortable. The officer starts friendly. "Hey, sorry to bother you so late. We're just looking into something in the neighborhood.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple quick questions?
That's the first test. The vast majority of people say yes. Because saying no feels rude. Saying no feels like you're admitting guilt. But here's the truth they don't teach you in high school civics. You are under no legal obligation to answer an officer's questions just because they showed up at your door. None. You can say, "I don't answer questions without my attorney present." You can say, "I'm not comfortable talking right now." You can simply close the door. Those are your constitutional rights, exercised perfectly lawfully. But almost nobody does it because your brain is screaming at you to de-escalate, to cooperate, to end the encounter as quickly as possible. The second test is even more dangerous. After asking a few routine questions, your name, whether you've seen anything unusual, whether you know a certain person, the officer will shift. "Is it okay if I step inside for a second? It's cold out here." Or, "Do you mind if I just take a quick look around? We've had some reports in the area, and it would really help us rule things out." This is where everything changes. Because if you say yes, if you open the door all the way and step aside, you have just given voluntary consent to a search. The police do not need a warrant if you consent. They do not need probable cause. They do not need any suspicion at all. Your polite, nervous, "Yeah, sure, come in," has just waived one of the most fundamental protections in American law. And once they're inside, they can seize anything in plain view. That prescription bottle on the coffee table. That item in the corner that looks like something they recognize. That open laptop with a screen they can glance at while asking about the noise complaint. You have lost control of your own home the moment you said yes. I need you to understand the psychology behind this because it's ruthless in its simplicity. Officers know that most people will not refuse consent. They know that the social pressure of having a uniformed authority figure at your door is immense. They know that you're afraid of appearing suspicious, so they use the knock as their opening move. But here's the dirty secret. In many jurisdictions, police have used cell simulator data to decide exactly when to knock. They wait until the device tells them you're home. They wait until your pattern shows you're alone. They wait until the data suggests you're in a vulnerable moment, late at night, early in the morning, right after you've arrived home from work and your guard is down. The simulator doesn't just track you. It gives them tactical intelligence about the best moment to ambush you psychologically. Let me give you a specific scenario that plays out in hundreds of American homes every single week. It's Thursday night, just after 10. You're in sweatpants, you've had one beer, the dog is asleep at your feet. There's a knock. You look through the peephole, two officers, one male, one female, both in soft uniforms. No visible weapons drawn. They don't look angry. You open the door. The female officer speaks first. "Evening, sorry to bother you. We're following up on an incident a couple blocks over. A neighbor reported someone matching a general description in the area. Do you mind if I ask where you were around 8 o'clock tonight?" The question is simple. You weren't doing anything wrong. You answer honestly. Then the male officer asks, "Would you mind if we just step in for a second and ask you a few more questions? It's just easier to hear you inside." You hesitate. He smiles. "Totally up to you. We're not accusing you of anything, just trying to get some information." That's the pressure. That's the manipulation. Because they just framed refusal as unreasonable. They made you feel that saying no would be an escalation. So you step aside. They enter. And the clock starts ticking on your rights. Once inside, officers are trained to scan immediately. Their eyes move systematically. Corners, surfaces, open doors, anything that could indicate danger or evidence. They're not just chatting, they're investigating. And they're also noting your emotional state. Are you shaking? Are you avoiding eye contact? Are you standing between them and the hallway? Every single one of those behaviors can be written in a report later as furtive movements or indicators of consciousness of guilt. Even if you're innocent, especially if you're innocent, because innocent people get nervous when police are in their living room. And that nervousness looks exactly like deception to an officer who has already decided you're worth following. Here's where the cell simulator comes back into the story. In many cases, the officers at your door already know more about your movements than you've told them. They know your phone was at your house during the time of the reported incident. They know your phone left the house at certain hours. They know your phone returned at certain times. And if you give them any answer that doesn't perfectly align with that data, they now have what they consider a lie. Even if the discrepancy is innocent, maybe you left your phone on the kitchen counter while you stepped into the backyard. Maybe you handed it to your teenager who ran to the corner store. The device doesn't capture context, it captures location. And when an officer believes you've lied, the friendly demeanor evaporates, the tone shifts, the questions become sharper. Are you sure you were home all night? Because we have reason to believe otherwise. They won't tell you about the simulator. They don't have to. It's not evidence they're required to disclose at the door. It's their secret weapon, a way to test your truthfulness without ever revealing their hand. I can already hear some of you thinking, but isn't that illegal? Don't they need a warrant for that kind of tracking? The answer is complicated and infuriating. For years, the Department of Justice and countless local police departments argued that using a cell simulator to locate a phone in real time was not a search under the Fourth Amendment. Their logic was twisted. Because you voluntarily carry a phone that constantly transmits signals to cell towers, they argued, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in that signal's approximate location. Courts have pushed back, slowly, inconsistently. Some federal courts now require a warrant for prolonged use of a simulator. Others allow it with a lower standard of proof. And a shocking number of local departments simply don't tell judges they're using the device at all, relying instead on a legal gray area that has never been fully resolved by the Supreme Court. That gray area is where your rights go to die. Because even in jurisdictions that technically require a warrant, police have learned to work around the requirement. They'll get a warrant for a different reason, say to search your phone after an arrest, and then claim the simulator data was just background intelligence that didn't need judicial approval. Or they'll use the simulator to establish probable cause retroactively, knocking on your door based on the device's location data, then using whatever they see or smell from the threshold to justify a warrant they didn't have before they knocked. This is not theoretical. This is documented in litigation from Florida to Oregon to Massachusetts. The simulator becomes the invisible predicate for the knock, and the knock becomes the predicate for the search. I want to talk about something that will make you uncomfortable. There's a phrase that gets thrown around in law enforcement training circles. We don't need a warrant if they let us in. And it's absolutely true. The Fourth Amendment protects you only against unreasonable searches conducted without your consent. The moment you voluntarily agree to let officers enter, the Constitution largely stops applying. They can look in your closets. They can open your drawers if something in plain view gives them a reason. They can ask to see your phone, your computer, your safe. And every time you say yes, you're waiving another layer of protection. Most people don't realize that they can revoke consent at any time. You can say, "I'm ending this conversation. Please leave." But almost nobody does, because by the time they realize how deep they've gotten, they're terrified that revoking consent will make them look even more guilty. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out, with the simulator in the background. A man in a suburban neighborhood hears knocking. He opens the door. Two detectives explain they're investigating a stolen vehicle that pinged near his address. They ask if they can ask a few questions. He agrees. They notice a car in his driveway that vaguely matches a description. They ask if they can look inside the car. He hesitates, then says yes. They find nothing. Then one detective asks, "Would you mind if we just walk through the house quickly? We're trying to see if someone might have run through your backyard." He says yes. They walk through. In the basement, they see a plastic bag with a green leafy substance. He's arrested for possession. Later, his attorney discovers that the ping the detectives referenced came from a cell simulator that was never disclosed to the judge, never authorized by a warrant, and arguably operated outside the department's own policies. But none of that matters because he consented to the search. The court doesn't care that the consent was based on a lie of omission. The court doesn't care that the detectives would never have knocked without the simulator's data. Once you say yes, the evidence is admissible. The damage is done. This is why I'm so aggressive about warning people. The most dangerous thing you can do when police come to your home is talk. Not because you're guilty, not because you have anything to hide, but because the legal system is designed in a way that rewards silence and punishes speech. Your words will be used against you. Your consent will be used against you. Your nervous laugh, your fumbled explanation, your attempt to justify where you were at 8 o'clock. All of it becomes a rope that officers can pull. And they are very, very good at pulling. I want you to imagine a different version of that knock. It's late. You hear the pounding. You look through the peephole. You see the uniforms. Instead of opening the door, you step back and speak through the closed door. Can I help you? The officer says they need to ask some questions. You say, I don't answer questions without a lawyer present. They say they just want to look around quickly. You say, I do not consent to any searches. If you have a warrant, you can slide it under the door. They say you're being uncooperative. You say nothing. You walk away from the door. You sit on your couch, heart pounding, waiting. What happens next? In most cases, nothing. They leave. Because they didn't have a warrant. They didn't have probable cause. They had a simulator's data and a hope that you would be afraid enough to let them in. You weren't. You won. But I need you to understand how rare that response is, how difficult it feels in the moment, how every social instinct screams at you to open the door and be polite. The psychological pressure officers apply is not accidental. They are trained to create urgency. They knock repeatedly, never giving you time to collect your thoughts. They change their tone, friendly one moment, firm the next, to keep you off balance. They separate roommates or partners if both answer the door, asking one to step outside while the other stays inside. They ask the same question 3 different ways, waiting for an inconsistency. They imply that if you just cooperate, everything will be easier. They suggest that refusing to talk is itself suspicious. And they do all of this while standing on your porch, a place where the law gives you tremendous protection if you know how to use it. The curtilage, the area immediately surrounding your home, enjoys the same Fourth Amendment protection as the home itself in most cases. They cannot enter your yard without a warrant or exigent circumstances. They cannot stand at your door and demand entry, but they can stand there and manipulate you until you invite them in. Here's a mistake I see constantly. People believe that because they're innocent, answering questions will quickly resolve the situation and the officers will leave. That might be true if the officers had accurate information and pure motives. But in the real world, officers often knock based on incomplete or mistaken simulator data. The device might show your phone at a location where a crime occurred, but you left your phone in an Uber that night. The device might show your phone moving in a pattern that matches a suspect's route, but your phone was in your gym bag while you played basketball. The device does not know context, it knows signals. And when you try to explain the innocent explanation, you sound exactly like every guilty person who has ever made up a cover story. You cannot prove a negative. You cannot prove you weren't somewhere. The harder you try, the more tangled you become. The only winning move, and I mean this literally, is to say almost nothing. Identify yourself if required by your state's Stop and Identify statute. But those laws generally don't apply when you're inside your own home. Ask if you're being detained. If the answer is no, say, I'm not answering questions, and close the door. If the answer is yes, say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent and my right to an attorney, and then stop speaking completely. Do not explain, do not justify, do not try to be helpful. The officers are not your friends. They are not there to help you. They are there to gather information that can be used against you, regardless of your innocence or guilt. That is their job. Respect the job, but protect your rights. I need to be honest about something uncomfortable. There are situations where police have a legal right to enter your home without a warrant. If they're in hot pursuit of a fleeing suspect, if they reasonably believe someone inside is in immediate danger, if they hear sounds of violence or someone calling for help. None of those situations involve a polite knock and a request to chat. In those situations, they're kicking the door in or announcing an emergency. The knock and talk, The friendly late-night visit is almost always a fishing expedition. They don't have enough for a warrant, but they're hoping you'll give them enough to get one. Don't be the fish. The cell simulator is just the newest tool in an old toolbox. Police have always surveilled. They've always looked for patterns. But the simulator changes the scale and the intimacy. It tracks you inside the place where you should be most free from government scrutiny. It knows when you sleep and when you wake. It knows when you have guests and when you're alone. And it tells officers exactly when to knock to catch you off guard. That is not paranoia. That is not conspiracy. That is the documented reality of modern policing in America, backed by court records, investigative journalism, and the quiet admissions of law enforcement agencies forced to disclose their policies. Before I close, I promised you that I would give you the specific phrases and mistakes that change everything. Here they are. Never say, "Come in." Never say, "Sure, I guess." Never say, "I don't have anything to hide." Never say, "I'll just answer a couple questions." Never say, "You can take a quick look." Every single one of those phrases is consent. Every single one waives a constitutional protection. Instead, practice saying this: I do not consent to any searches. I am not answering questions. If you have a warrant, I will comply. If not, please leave my property. Say it calmly. Say it without anger. Then close the door. They will call you uncooperative. They will imply you're guilty. Let them. Their opinion of you is not evidence. Your silence is not an admission. And your front door is the single most important legal boundary you will ever defend. One last thing. I want you to go back to that opening scene. The blue lights through the blinds. The pounding on the wood. Your heart racing in the dark. That could be tonight. It could be tomorrow. It could be 3 years from now. The question isn't whether police have the technology to find you. They do. The question is whether you'll know what to say and what not to say when they do. Share your story in the comments if you've been through this. And more importantly, share this article with someone who still believes that knocking only happens to other people, because the next knock could be for them. And forewarned is not just forearmed. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between a closed door and a nightmare you never saw coming.